On today's Locked On Big 12 podcast, Andrew Marchand of the New York Post joins the show to give thoughts on the latest news. ESPN in or out on the Pac-12 television contract? What does it mean for the Big 12? Timeline for this entire process, the job that Brett Yormark has done as Big 12 commissioner, the future of sports television as well. We hit it all with Andrew Marchand on today's show.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast, backed by very much popular demand, Andrew Marchand of the New York Post. The folks have been clamoring for you, Andrew. The listeners, they wanted you back. So, and it's a great time to have you back because we had a couple reports last night. Dennis Dodd always has the kind of Big 12 sourcing. They say, ESPN's out on the Pac-12. And then we hear Ross Dellinger, Sports Illustrated, the call hour back of The Athletic, say ESPN's still in. What are you hearing on the ESPN Pac-12 front? And once again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I would say never. I don't like to say someone's out. But I would say that the interest is definitely tepid. At least that's where has been trending for a while. We've reported, both John Oren and I, that the Pac-12 could have had the deal the Big 12 got with ESPN and Fox. The Big 12 stepped in front of them. If you look at how the amount of games they need, especially for their linear networks, that need has already been fulfilled. So could ESPN get in there? Yeah, I think so. But I think when you talk about a deal, it's not going to be some overpriced deal. Like when you talk about beating the Big 12, I'd be shocked if they got a deal from ESPN that beat the Big 12 deal at this point, with ESPN with layoffs, cutting back on costs, a little bad timing for the Pac-12. The idea that they could still do a deal, as far as I know, never say never. But again, I think trending the wrong direction, or had been trending the wrong direction. And I don't think even if it, started to trend the other way, it's not going to be some great deal. It would be a very advantageous deal for ESPN, exposure for the Pac-12. And of course, if they can get within a certain range, depending on which AD you believe, trying to keep the conference together with the exposure and with a number that's close to the Big 12. But still, I don't think if there's an ESPN deal out there, I don't think it's a great one.
So when these discussions are happening, because we had a few of the presidents of the Pac-12 out recently saying they were confident they were going to get around the Big 12's number. And I know there's a lot of public posturing, but some of the comments also kind of alluded to like them not having a formal deal. They said, we think we're going to like the numbers that we're get. How does this conversation go? Is it like, here is a hard number? Or is it a range type deal? And obviously it's these it's a situation. We've got multiple television partners, at the same time, potentially a streamer as well. So like, what are the conversations actually like? So people have an idea of, what the conversation actually looks like.
I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And then you have, we've talked about Apple, if they could have interest in it. And, the thing about Apple deal, and this is why it doesn't fully line up for the Pac-12, is that I can't remember which athletic director or president said that they don't want to just be on a streamer. But that's been stated, right, by one of the...
Right. George Liavkov even said it before.
Okay, yeah. So Apple's only doing an Apple deal. Like, Apple's not doing some deal that's like, okay, we'll take a little bit of this. They're just...
Right.
They're not built that way. They're, if not the number one digital company in the world, their cap is like $1 trillion. Like, they do what they want. Right. And what they want... If there might not even be any, that might be even done. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know where that stands exactly. But two things. If Apple is still in play, Apple does take forever. So they're going to go on Apple's timeline. And a deal would be an Apple deal. It just wouldn't be like they get the secondary games. I'd be, again, shocked if that were the case. Never say never, but shocked if that were the case. They would want, in my opinion, everything. Similarly to how the MLS deal is, where it's $250 million. MLS subtracts that money because they're handling production. So depending on who you believe, it's somewhere between $170 and $200 million per year. and then they get all the games, every single one of them. And so I think that's the only way they would do a Pac-12 deal. That's them. Amazon I don't think is involved, if at all. Again, never say never, but I think very unlikely Amazon Pac-12 deal happens. And so when you ask about overall, those are two digital players that those are different type of deals. I know there's been reporting like it's new, so it's going to take long. I don't really buy that. That seems like posturing for, the Pac-12 has kind of had to push back their deadlines and their expectations a number of times. And so, Apple does take a long time. Amazon knows what they're doing. I mean, they've done these deals before. I don't think they have TV people in place and they have digital people in place. And so, but I don't think it's going to be Amazon. I'd be surprised if it's Amazon. Again, you can turn back to people, but I'd be surprised if it's Amazon. Surprised at this point. Again, ESPN, when you talk about them, I think I wouldn't totally rule them out, but I just don't think it's going to be one of those deals that if it ends up that way, that's going to be like a great win for the Pac-12, because I'd be very surprised. Maybe it's within what the Big 12 gets, but it would be less than. And so then where do you go from there if you're the teams that are considering moving to the Big 12?
Yeah. So also on the cable front, we've heard the CW has been involved, and I believe is Nexstar the parent company that bought them.
Yeah, but they got some deep pockets.
So they want to get in the live sports space is what it sounds like. They're kind of there with Live Golf, which I don't know if anybody. I'm a golf fan. I've not consumed one Live tournament. Yep. Are they looking for gradual steps, or you said they have deep pockets and looking, for the whole shebang? I mean, what is, for the CW, what do you think their involvement?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is interest, and I think they are willing to spend. So, I can't tell you definitively the CW is, deep into talks. But, they did Live Golf because, nobody else really wanted Live Golf. And they are, now they have money, and they are thinking about getting into sports. And that is on broadcast TV. But again, when you're talking about games that were on ABC, ESPN, Fox, FS1, with all due respect to the CW, you just don't think of it as, if you're the Pac-12. Right. And the Pac-12, they lost to UCLA and USC, but, traditionally this is up there as, obviously it's a Big Five, but, as, up the top. And so do they really want to be on the CW? I don't really think that's where they want to be. But I can't rule them out. But when you do a deal with the CW and you're the Pac-12, what you ideally really want to be doing is you're in heavy negotiations with ESPN, and then the CW blows you away. You don't really want to do like a market value deal with the CW.
Right.
You want to be changing your number so you go into the future where this is where we're going. With the problem for the Pac-12, and this is what, like, if I'm the president or athletic director is of Pac-12 schools, is like, where does it leave you for the next contract? Because you're already a step behind. And how are you going to make those steps up? Are you going to bring in other schools? And, I don't really see that at the moment. And if so, who and how? I mean, obviously they're going to bring in other schools, but, San Diego State's one that everyone talks about. That's not changing any TV dynamics, right? And so what does that mean for the future of the next contract and the next one? And so once you start going backwards, it's not impossible to change that course. But the Big 12, I think they do have the momentum. They got the deal before the Pac-12.
Quick word from our sponsors on today's Locked On Big 12 podcast. We are brought to you all by the folks at Built Bar. Healthy taste, a healthy and amazing taste is what Built Bar brings to you. They are covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in unbelievably delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. Not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And that's what's even better about them. They are healthy, under only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. You don't need to wait to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering Built bars. You guys can go to Built.com, but now they have them at Walmart and Sam's Club, 4 packs at Walmart, the big pack at Sam's Club, that variety pack. You guys can get those as well. So Built.com, Walmart and Sam's Club is where you guys can get the delicious and good for you Built Bar today.
They're talking about innovation with things, and they kind of feel like forward thinking, as opposed to the Pac-12, which seems to be more on its back foot, trying to figure things out. And they might have a good solution. Look, there's some wild cards out there. want to make this as clear as day. I am not reporting this at all, so nobody can say, but I think it was mentioned the other day, USA Network with NBC.
Right.
That's a major network that has, very good distribution. You'd want to get on broadcast, but that doesn't really work, right? Because they have the Big Ten, and then there's no writer's strike. You have Saturday Night Live that they're not going to preempt for college football, at least the Pac-12. So do you want to be on USA? Maybe. I mean, that's not like a terrible outcome if you ask me for the Pac-12.
No.
And then another one that does make sense to me is Turner and WBD Sports, because they really they have the NCAA tournament on TBS and all the Turner networks. They don't have regular season college hoops, which is kind of a hole in there. With the way it works, like they just kind of show up for the NCAA tournament. It'd be better if they had, gotten to the college game, and then, they could add college football. So, there's some sales components. If I'm the Pac-12, that I'm looking at Turner, and I think if I'm Turner, I'm looking at it where they're selling the NCAA tournament with basketball, but they don't sell it during the regular season. So there's some advantages to having a full slate. So to me, that's one, again, not reporting that. I think they've talked for certain, but I don't know if there's anything cooking there, but just one that makes some sense.
So when we talked to, we saw recently the San Diego State athletic director made a comment last week where he said, we're either going to the Pac-12 or the Big 12. And I thought, to me, that comment basically laid it all out, where the Pac-12 people are just kind of waiting for formal numbers, I guess, even though they pushed back these deadlines. And then the schools on a case-by-case basis are going to make decisions on their futures. I mean, is that kind of the way you're feeling on this situation?
Look, I've been a reporter for a long time. Number one, you trust actions, not words.
Right.
And like, no one's going to say they're leaving until they're leaving. So right. I know, like, it feels like, again, I'm sort of on the side looking at this like Big 12, Pac-12 thing. Like,
you're number one Pac-12 disruptor, right?
That's been I don't know what I am. I'm just trying to cover what I cover.
Right.
And this is sort of just because of the podcast, we've sort of gotten into this, and it's an interesting subject and something that people are interested in, and we happen to have sourcing on it. So I have no real stake in the game, but I will say, like, no one's going to say they're leaving till they're leaving. And I actually think if you read some of the comments, it's more of they're setting the stage of possibly leaving, because what these presidents, some of them, again, not go one by one, but what I've read, it just sounds like, well, if they don't reach this number, it's not my fault. Like, I don't think anybody wants to be blamed for being the one to ruin the Pac-12. Understandably so.
They have the out there. They have the
out. It's like, you didn't come through, and this is what we have to do for the betterment of the university and our athletic programs. And so that's what I've been reading, in my opinion. And that, I think ideally, most of these conferences, they'd rather stay in their conference. Why would you want to be the one to, it falls to USC and UCLA, first and foremost, I think, with the Pac-12. But, if one team leaves, what does that do to the Pac-12, right? That's the thing. And so it's, and they can't really make a decision, and that's what they've said, until there's a new deal. And so I think ideally they'd all want, a nice strong deal that's similar to the Big 12, and just stay and go from there and live happily ever after. There's still Power 5. There's still some things, in terms of what's happening with the college football championship that might be even advantageous to be in, like, a conference that's not as strong in terms of when the playoff comes in. So I could see that, but to me, what I've read and where it stands, I think they're waiting and seeing. And I do get a lot of, especially from TV people, and not that they're not rooting for anybody. I think most of the TV people would want the Pac-12 to exist, but where there's, a little pessimism of what's going on with the Pac-12. And not that I think they all like George Kliavkoff, and I think he's a good guy, but just in terms of where the situation is. And I've said this before, these networks, in these digital players like Apple and Amazon, they're not charities, right? They're businesses. They're making business decisions. They're not just going to bail out, a league or a conference just because, it'd be nice to do. They're going to do it because this is big business, and it makes sense for them for what they're trying to do in the television and sports space.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting to see San Diego State's probably going to make a jump to the Power Five. I thought it was interesting to see their athletic director acknowledge, like, yeah, it's these two places. It's kind of one of the first public acknowledgments of that we've had. I want to ask you about Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, and I've heard you all on your podcast have given him, his flowers, and I think that the reason why this has worked so well for him at the Big 12 is because he is not like what you think the Big 12 commissioner would be, a conference mostly based out of the state of Texas. You wouldn't think it'd be somebody like Brett Yormark, but he's come in. I think that's why it's working, is because he's got different kinds of ideas. And I don't think all of them work. I think the Gonzaga thing, I think the schools in the Big 12 are probably skeptical about how the money works, but I think Brett probably sees a picture about basketball and is like, I want to create this unbelievable basketball product. We could sell it off by itself in the future, things of that nature. But I think the ideas part of it is probably what makes him an effective commissioner, is because he is not a Big 12 guy. He's not like a middle America guy. I think he went to Indiana, but I think we think about like where he has been career wise. It's not, the Big 12 is not kind of this match made in heaven, I guess, culturally, but I think that's why it's working. Is that kind of your read?
Yeah, I would say also, and I don't know Brett Yormark. Maybe talked to him before when he was with the Nets, but I don't know him. But it's a cutthroat business. We all want it to be college athletics, amateur athletics, student athletes, and this is cutthroat at this point, and that's what he's done, right? I'm not saying anything that sounds kind of harsh. Like, I don't mean it like that. I just mean
he gets the business.
This is business, and he's made decisions that appear, look, I will tell you this too. We all think we know the answers, or like, have this, long term, maybe the Pac-12 will end up in a better space. But at least as of right now, it looks like, the Big 12 is up about, 32-12. That was a weird football score to pick out. Let me do it again. How about 28-10? Right now, that's what it feels like. And he's made good decisions. And so, I think you're right. He comes at it with some different ideas. I mean, he was totally off with where he had the media. And I know people listening, like, I don't care where the media is during the Big 12 championship. He had him in Timbuktu. I mean, two things there is that, again, I know there are going to be fans like, I don't care the media. But
the ones telling the stories. You got to have
newspapers and TV organizations and other platforms, they're paying a lot of money to send their people there so they can cover the games and understand the story. And I thought that was disrespectful. And when he talked about first in class, I thought that was ridiculous. So that's something hopefully they revise next year, because people are trying to cover the games. I get it. They don't necessarily deserve like the best seat in the house. Nobody's saying that, but they should be able to see and not have to look on a monitor when they're paying all that money to promote the sport. Anyway, I digress. I did that one. I have no personal stake in that, but just as so, when you deal with that, it's kind of silly. But overall, Yormark's done a tremendous job. There's no doubt about that. And just it's when you look at it, if a book's ever written about this in terms of decisions of what happens in the future, and we don't know yet, of the Big 12 and the Pac-12 and just college football, the move to jump the line and do a deal with ESPN and Fox, it could look like one of the great ones, because I think ESPN and Fox would have done a deal with the Pac-12, obviously with Fox after, they were helpful in terms of UCLA and USC leaving for the Big Ten. I think I could see, if I'm the Pac-12 people, like, I don't know if I'm going to quickly do a deal with Fox at that point, but there was an ESPN deal to be done, and they didn't do it. So I think, the Big 12 and Yormark have looked really good on this.
Your sense on timeline for resolution for all of us. I mean, we are now at the point where their contract is only through this year. So it's not, there is a deadline. Now I know it's a while off, but at what point, and I guess we, it's up to the school presidents, but like, at what point does a president just go and say, I mean, we can't keep waiting. The Big 12 is there waiting for us in some sense, but at some point, if a deal is not going to materialize, like how long can you wait for somebody to just come out of the clouds like a USA Network and give you the money that you want?
Yeah, I think this is about trust and relationships in terms of that. And so, like, for me to put a deadline on it, I couldn't. But you have to be able to talk to the commissioner and be able to say, hey, this is what we're looking for. And understand, like, this is what's on the table. I mean, look, the fact that it keeps dragging out is not a good sign. Like anybody who thinks this is a good sign for the Pac-12, again, it might work out for them in the end. It's not a good sign. They keep pushing back, the deadlines of different people. Like we've heard, ADs and presidents say, tax day, around tax day. I guess tax day was April 17th this year, but I think it was April 15th was the deadline. And so, but you keep hearing, things like that. And then by this time, by that, and then keep getting pushed back. That's not good, right? That's not, if you have a good deal, you take it and it's done and they move on and everything's resolved. So, I think probably everybody in the Big 12 and the Pac-12, especially the Pac-12, wants this to be resolved. But you need a deal to do that. And, right now it doesn't look as if they have a great deal. They might come out of it and then be like, you know what, we got money similar or the same as the Big 12. But I would say if that happens, it will mean that they're on one of these CW or something, a little bit different than what we're used to in college football, which can work, but isn't exactly what they were going into thinking where, they could have been ESPN and Fox.
Finally, before we get you out of here, the news that ESPN, it sounds like eventually it's going to be all direct to consumer. And I know you've talked about this and just kind of where televised sports is heading. Cable still has pretty big hold, right? I think with a lot of the numbers that we see still has a pretty large hold, but ESPN, the worldwide leader, is saying they're eventually going to be all direct to consumer. I mean, what do you see here next 5 to 10 years as the shape of sports television and, sports streaming? Like, is it going to be?
So it's very important. Yeah. So it's very important for people to understand this. So ESPN, I believe in the next 3 to 4 years, probably 3 years, will have a direct to consumer product, meaning you'll be able to buy ESPN just directly and you won't need cable. That said, it will still be on cable. So if you're sitting here and you say, you know what, I like how things are, I don't want to change anything, then you'll be fine. And I do think when all this happens, and we already seen a lot of products that are direct to consumer of regional sports networks. For example, in New York, we have the Yes Network and MSG Network, which have the Yankees and Knicks respectively, among other teams, and they have direct to consumer products and they're still on cable. That's where you're going to see the future, where you could do cable, and then you could try to piece it together. Because
do you think cable is going to hang around for it's pretty safe?
I mean, yeah, I think it'll be like newspapers. I think it will survive. I think most people and analysts think it will go down to 50 million people. Right now it's about 74 million. And then there'll be kind of like that leveling off at 50 million. I mean, those aren't my numbers. Those are kind of analyst numbers and some internal places of networks where they project. And so if it does that at, 50 million, and then you add the direct to consumer content, you can just have to figure it out. Because, for example, I know most of your listeners are probably Big 12 fans, but if ESPN goes direct to consumer, you get ESPN, but your game's on FS1, then you're going to need cable at that point too.
Right, you need cable, yeah.
Right? Like, again, you can figure it out because, in theory, that might only be a couple of games that you would miss, and maybe you just go to a bar or whatever. But, it becomes a little more tricky when you have that scenario. And then they're going to put some games on just ESPN Plus. So they're basically charging you twice for your same games for these each network. So at the end of the day, it's not that great for the fans. I mean, that's the biggest issue, is because games are just all over the place. And even though we've all probably, I don't want to speak for you, Josh, but have hated cable and the companies, and they've been like monopolies forever and they're annoying and whatever, but they're going to come out looking a little bit better in terms of, it's just like, okay, it's all there. Like, I want to watch a game, it's on there. Now there's unlimited, for someone like me who likes other sports, you want to watch track and field, you want to watch, a lot of the women's sports that haven't been on now, obviously getting more coverage, but, digitally it's great because there's more games on. But in terms of your meat, potato, football, basketball, especially on the men's side, it's going to cost more to watch those games than it did. And you'll have access to all of them. It's just, you're going to have to pay here, pay there, and that can add up.
Yeah. I think my thought was, maybe does the fact that the biggest, sports company out there going direct to consumers signals something maybe for cable, but you think it's, despite that, it's still
signal something. Yeah. I mean, but what happens, I think, is cable pays these places a little bit less money, but they lose exclusivity. So
Right.
I think that's where ultimately it goes. And then in terms as a consumer, as a viewer, you get to decide what you want. And some people will be happy with getting, ESPN direct to consumer, and then having Netflix and then being done. And that would be a lot cheaper. But it's complicated. Like, I've tried to see if I could cut the cord and, try YouTube TV, and it just doesn't work. Cause like MSG, at least at that point, wasn't on it. Now they have like, MSG Network, which has the Knicks and Rangers. Now they have an app. So in theory, I could go and try YouTube TV and then get the app, but it gets complicated. You know what I mean? Like even watching games, it's different on streaming. Like I was watching the Yankee game was on Amazon Prime locally in New York last night. You watch that, you can't flip to the basketball game. You can't flip to,
right.
So it's changing. And again, for the viewer, for the fan, it's not great. Now, for the fan of a sports that haven't been covered as much, it is tremendous because you have better coverage. But for the top games and the way they're spread out, it's not as easy and more expensive.
Andrew Marchand, New York Post. Where can people find you and your work in all of its variety?
So if you like listening, the Marchand and Oran Sports Media Podcast, we come out every Wednesday morning, and we talk about everything, including the Big 12 and Pac-12. And then every day in the New York Post, for your listeners, probably NewYorkPost.com. And then I have a newsletter. If you want to pay for a subscription to a newsletter every Monday, which sometimes I chime in on this college football stuff. That's every Monday in New York Post Sports Plus. That's only $4.99 a month. And so those are all the ways you can find me. And I could take Twitter, but I don't care about Twitter. If you want to find me on Twitter,
you're out on Twitter now?
No, I'm not out on it. I just for the media, it just doesn't really, it's not as like great an asset. Obviously Elon Musk has changed things as well. It's not about losing blue check marks. I couldn't care less about that. It's just like, if you look, it doesn't really like, I work for the New York Post. I don't work for Twitter. I mean, the idea that I should pay Twitter is like so ridiculous. It's like if anything, they should be paying people like me or you or everybody because we're the content.
They're coming to get the news there. Yes,
exactly. So why would my place of employment encourage you to put the information out at another place which they have no relationship with? They can make no profit on that. And the other problem with it is, if you look, and I can see the metrics behind it, now Twitter, generally speaking, does not lead to people coming to your website as much as people would think. It's not a great, like people don't click through as much as you want. It makes sense when you break it down, you're scrolling through. So for you to stop and read a full story, that's kind of, you're saying you have one experience. Now we want you to do a different experience. Now people do that. And there have been stories that I've had where it's gotten, a lot of traction there, but the majority of stories, that's not where the audience comes from.
Facebook. What are we doing now?
Google really is the biggest one.
Yeah.
Search is really like, if you have a big story, people search it, and Google is pretty good. At least I can tell my stuff is that the original place their algorithm at this point does figure out that you're the one who broke it, and they make sure you're the one first, and then all the people who copy it, aggregate it, they're not first. So that helps a lot. And then people come directly to the site. I mean, it comes in a lot of different ways. I mean, Facebook as well, but Facebook also is, I don't think, I'm not really on Facebook. I'm on it technically, but I haven't posted something in years.
I'm the same way.
Yeah,
I'm the same way. It's changing, man. It's all changing very fast, right? With all, especially the social media part of it.
Yeah, I'm not a big social media fan. I don't think it's healthy for us. And
with this conversation, my God, you should see some of the comments that we got. All right, I've kept you too long, Andrew. We appreciate your time as always.
All right, thanks for having me, Josh.